The coffee pot trembled in Wren Calloway's hand 3 seconds before she understood why. It wasn't the weight. 6 years of double shifts had built calluses that could carry a full pot without a shake. It was the window behind table 9, the one that caught the street in a long gray mirror when the afternoon light hit it just right, and the shape that had stopped outside it. A man, still, facing the glass door of Merrow's diner like he was waiting for a light to change, except the light had changed twice already and he hadn't moved, and his right hand sat inside his jacket at an angle that had nothing to do with warmth. She had seen that angle before. In another life, in another uniform, she had been trained to see that angle before she saw the man's face. Table 9 held one guest, a woman in a charcoal coat that cost more than Wren's yearly rent, dark hair pulled back with surgical precision, a phone face down beside an untouched cup of black coffee. She had ordered nothing else. She had said 4 words altogether, black coffee, no cream, and then gone silent, the particular silence of someone who had learned that silence kept people at a distance. Wren set the pot down, picked up the check pad. Her hand did not shake this time. She wrote the total first, the way she always did, tax and all. Then, underneath it, in small block letters she pressed hard enough to nearly tear the paper, she wrote 4 more words and circled them twice. Gunman behind you. Leave now. She slid the bill across the table face up, the way you'd slide a bill to anyone, and said in the flattest, most bored waitress voice she owned, "Whenever you're ready." The woman's eyes dropped to the paper. For 1 full second, nothing in her face moved at all. Then, her gaze lifted, not to Wren, but past her, a fast surgical read of the window, the door, the angle of the street, and something in her shifted that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with math. Before this story goes any further, if you're the kind of listener who needs to know how a moment like that gets survived, do yourself a favor and subscribe to the channel now so you don't lose your place in what's coming. The woman reached for her wallet with a hand that did not tremble either. "How long?" she said quietly, not a question so much as a request for a number, "since he arrived?" 90 seconds, give or take. Wren kept her voice low, her body angled to block the window's sightline with her own. "He hasn't moved. That means he's waiting for someone inside to clear a table. Or for backup. You've done this before, once or twice." Wren's mouth twitched, not quite a smile. Kitchen doors behind the pie case. Employees only, but nobody's going to card you today. The woman studied her for exactly as long as it took to decide something. Then she stood, unhurried, dropped 3 folded bills on the table without counting them, and said 4 words that would follow Wren for the rest of her life. "After you then," quickly, her name, Wren would learn within the hour, was Sabine Voss. The papers called her the Vault because in 11 years of running Voss Dynamics, the largest secure logistics network on the eastern seaboard, nothing had ever leaked out of her company and nothing had ever cracked its way in. Nothing until 3 years ago, when something had. Wren didn't know that part yet. She only knew that the woman moving low and fast behind her through a kitchen that smelled of fryer oil and burnt garlic did not ask a single unnecessary question, did not hesitate at the propped door, did not so much as glance back at the dining room she was leaving behind. She only knew that when they burst out into the alley behind Merrow's diner and a black car was already rolling toward them, already before anyone could have called it, the scent that came off Sabine Voss in the sudden adrenaline surge was black cypress and gunmetal. Cold and controlled even now, and that some traitorous part of Wren's chest had noticed it before her mind caught up to the danger they were both still standing in. The car door was open before they reached it, A woman with cropped gray-black hair and a jaw like a closed fist was already out of the front seat, weapon low against her thigh, eyes sweeping the alley in a fast professional arc. "Ma'am." "Move, Priya." Sabine's voice had gone flat, commanding. The voice of someone used to being obeyed in half a syllable. "There's a shooter on Ashford Street, southeast corner, dark green jacket, right-hand carry. He hasn't engaged yet." Priya's eyes cut to Wren, just once, cataloging her. "Who's this?" "The reason I'm alive to tell you about him." Sabini put a hand at the small of Wren's back, not proprietary, not gentle either, simply certain, the way you'd steady something you intended to keep upright, and steered her into the car. Drive. The engine was already moving before the door shut. Wren's heart was doing something complicated against her ribs, half fear and half a feeling she hadn't let herself have in 2 years, the clean, humming rightness of being useful, of a threat correctly read and correctly answered. Across from her, Sabine Voss sat with her spine straight and her hands folded, watching the city slide by the tinted glass, and did not look shaken at all, only awake. Newly, dangerously awake. "You wrote it on the bill," Sabine said finally, not turning her head. "Instead of screaming, instead of running, you wrote it on a piece of paper and handed it to me like a lunch total." "Screaming gets people killed," Wren said. "Panic is loud. Loud things get noticed." Sabine turned then, and her eyes, pale gray, the color of a sky before a storm decides which way it's going to break, moved over Wren's face with a focus that felt like being read cover to cover. "What were you," she asked quietly, "before you were pouring my coffee?" Wren looked down at her own hands, chapped from bleach water and dish soap, nails cut short and unpolished, and said the truth because there was no version of this car ride where a lie would survive. "Army, 6 years. Protective intelligence. I read rooms for a living, patterns, threat indicators, before I read a check pad for tips." Her jaw tightened. "I got discharged. It's a long story." "I have time," Sabine said, as of about 4 minutes ago, apparently. "I have a great deal of time I wasn't expecting to keep." The car merged onto the highway, and behind them, sirens finally began to bloom, small and late and useless, chasing a street corner where the danger had already come and gone. 2 years, 3 months, and 11 days earlier, Wren Calloway had stood in front of a review board and watched 3 officers decide, in under 4 minutes, that the easiest person to blame for a compromised protective detail was the Omega sergeant who'd flagged the breach and been overruled. She hadn't fought it. Fighting cost money she didn't have and a lawyer she couldn't afford, not with her sister Josie's 2nd year of nursing school sitting on her shoulders like a second spine. So she'd taken the discharge, the honorable on paper, quietly ruined underneath kind, and she'd found the one job that would take someone with a resume full of redacted lines and no explanation, pouring coffee at Marrow's Diner on the corner of Ashford and 9th 6 days a week, for tips that on a good night covered the electric bill. Nobody at Marrow's knew what she used to be. Nobody asked. The regulars called her sweetheart and left change instead of dollars. Her manager, a man named Gus, who smelled permanently of onions and impatience, docked her pay the one time she was 40 seconds late, and never once in 18 months learned that the tired girl refilling his coffee could clear a room of exits in under 4 seconds without looking like she was doing it. She hadn't planned to use that skill again. She had told herself, somewhere around month 6, that the person who used to see danger in doorways was gone, folded up and put away with the uniform she wasn't allowed to wear anymore. Then a woman in a charcoal coat had sat down at table 9, ordered black coffee with no cream, and Wren's whole discarded self had come roaring back to life in under 2 minutes. Because some skills, it turned out, didn't retire. They only waited. The car did not take them to a police station. It took them to a glass tower that occupied an entire block of the financial district, 40 floors of black steel and mirrored windows that Wren had walked past 100 times without ever once looking up, and an elevator that required a palm print, a retinal scan, and a code Priya Nakamura entered without looking at the pad. "You run all this," Wren said, "somewhere around floor 20, and you get lunch at a diner with paper napkins." "I get lunch at a diner with paper napkins," Sabine said, "because it's the 1 hour a week nobody expects to find me." A muscle moved along her jaw. Or it was, until today. The elevator opened onto a floor that felt less like an office and more like the inside of a bank vault, dressed up as one, clean lines, low voices, a dozen people who all turned to look and then, at some silent signal, made themselves very busy not looking. A woman near the reception desk with sleek copper hair and a smile like a blade wrapped in silk drifted over before they'd taken 3 steps. Sabine, her eyes slid to Wren, and did a slow, unbothered inventory. The flower dust still on Wren's collar, the name tag that said Wren in cheerful looping script, the scuffed sneakers that had never once touched marble like this. "You brought home a stray." "Celia," Sabine's voice cooled by several degrees. "There was an incident. Wren is the reason I'm standing here discussing it with you, instead of being carried out of Marrow's diner in a bag." Something flickered behind Celia Marsh's eyes, there and gone so fast that only someone trained to read faces for a living would have caught it. Wren caught it, filed it away without a word. "How dramatic," Celia said lightly, already turning, her scent, something sweet and cloying, like flowers left too long in a closed room, trailing after her. "Do keep me posted. I will find you a place to stay tonight," Sabine said to Wren, once Celia was out of earshot, as if the interruption had never happened. "And in the morning, we'll discuss what I owe you. It's considerable. You don't owe me anything. I read a room and wrote on a bill. You saved my life with a pen that was almost out of ink." Sabine's mouth curved, faint and unpracticed, like a muscle that hadn't been used in a while. "I noticed. It skipped on the second circle." Wren looked down at her own hands again, startled that anyone had noticed a detail that small, and did not yet understand that noticing was the thing this woman did best, the thing that would come to define every quiet, devastating gesture between them for months to come. Sabine Voss's apartment, if it could be called that and not something closer to a fortress with better lighting, occupied the top 4 floors of Voss Tower, and it was the quietest place Wren had ever stood in. No street noise, no hum of a fridge that needed replacing, just glass and stone and, somewhere far below, a city that had almost buried a body on Ashford Street 2 hours earlier. "You'll stay here tonight," Sabine said. "Priya's team swept your building already. There's a possibility whoever hired that man knows your face now. I won't gamble with that. I have a shift tomorrow. You don't." Sabine said it simply, without arrogance, the way she seemed to say most things, flat declaratives, no room built in for argument. "I've offered your employer a settlement generous enough that he'll be thanking me by dinner. I need the job. Miss Voss, Sabine, a correction, gentle for a woman who ran an empire on precision. And you need a job that doesn't get you shot at for tips. I have one. Consultant, threat assessment, direct report to Priya. The pay will embarrass you." Wren's throat tightened around a dozen things she wasn't ready to say, about pride, about the 2 years she'd spent believing no one would ever again ask what she used to be good at, about a discharge that had taught her competence was something people used against you if you let them see it. "Why me?" "You have security teams." Ex-military consultants who don't smell like fryer grease. Sabine crossed the room slowly, the low evening light catching gray in her eyes, turning them the exact color of the storm that had been building over the city all afternoon and never broken. Because in 90 seconds, in a room full of people trained to notice danger, you were the only one who did. Because you didn't scream, you didn't run, you solved the problem with a pen and 4 words and handed it to me like it was nothing. She stopped an arm's length away, close enough that Wren caught the low, steady note of black cypress and gunmetal again, cold and clean, and underneath it now, something warmer stirring. Because I have not, in 3 years, met a single person I trusted within the first hour of meeting them. You are the exception. I don't know what to do with that yet, but I intend to find out. Wren's pulse did something unfamiliar, something that had nothing to do with the gunman on Ashford Street and everything to do with the particular gravity of being looked at like she was worth understanding instead of overlooking. You don't even know my last name. Calloway, Sabine said. 28, discharged 2 years ago on a technicality that should never have stuck. Sister, Josephine, second-year nursing student at Colby State. You've paid $4,000 of her tuition out of a waitress's salary in the last year alone. A pause, precise as a held breath. I looked you up in the elevator. I apologize if that feels invasive. In my world, not knowing who's standing next to you gets people killed. You just described my whole life in one sentence, Wren said, and made it sound like a security report. It is one, Sabine said. It's also the most impressive thing I've read all year. That night, Wren slept in a guest room with a bed too large for one person and sheets that felt like something out of a hotel she'd never be able to afford. And somewhere 2 floors above her, Sabine Voss stood at a window overlooking a city that had, for the second time in 3 years, tried to take something from her and failed. She did not sleep. She stood with a glass of water she never drank and thought about a pen skipping ink on the second circle of a warning, and about how long it had been since anyone had looked at danger and thought first, calmly, of protecting her instead of themselves. The guest wing Priya walked her through the next morning had its own kitchen, its own reading nook, its own view that made Wren's chest ache with a longing she didn't have a name for yet. Consultant badge, Priya said, sliding a laminated card across a marble counter that had never once held a coffee ring. Building access, floors 1 through 30. You'll report to me directly. Sabine wants you read into the file today. The file. 3 years ago, a bombing at the Port Meridian terminal killed 6 people, including Sabine's wife. Priya's voice was flat, professional. The voice of someone who had said this sentence enough times to have worn the grief off its edges without ever quite forgetting it was there. Elena Voss. It was ruled an act by a rival logistics cartel trying to break into the Eastern Corridor. Case closed within 4 months. Sabine built this building's entire security apparatus in response. No leaks. No breaches. Nothing has touched her in 3 years. She looked at Wren, something unreadable moving behind her eyes. Until yesterday, Wren sat with that for a long moment, watching morning light pool gold across marble that had never known what it was to be poor. You don't think it's a coincidence. I don't believe in those, Priya said. In 15 years working this family's security, I have never once seen Sabine Voss wait at a table for anyone the way she waited for you to hand her that bill. Her mouth tightened, not quite a smile. That worries me more than the gunman does. Wren's new office, if it could be called that, sat 2 doors from Priya's, glass-walled and humming with the low blue light of 6 monitors she wasn't yet sure how to use. Her first assignment was simple on paper, Review 3 years of security logs for any pattern connecting the Ashford Street shooter to the Port Meridian bombing. In practice, it meant 12 hours a day buried in surveillance timestamps and supplier manifests, in a silence so total she found herself missing the clatter of the diner, the smell of burnt coffee, the marigolds she used to water on the windowsill even though they weren't hers to keep alive. She mentioned that once, in passing, to Dara over the phone, and thought nothing of it. She mentioned, another night, an unfinished paperback mystery she'd been carrying in her apron pocket for 4 months and never had time to finish. She did not expect either detail to matter to anyone. On the 4th day, a small potted marigold appeared on her desk with no note attached. On the 6th, the missing half of the mystery novel showed up beside it, a different edition, clearly bought in a hurry, its spine still stiff. "You didn't have to do that," Wren said, finding Sabine in the hallway outside her office that evening, unable to keep the surprise out of her voice. "I didn't do anything," Sabine said, not quite meeting her eyes, the closest thing to embarrassment Wren had yet seen cross that composed face. "I mentioned it to my assistant. You remembered I said it at all. I remember everything you say." Sabine's gaze finally lifted, steady, unflinching, the kind of honesty that cost her something to give. "It's a professional hazard, or possibly not a professional one at all." The air between them went taut in a way that had nothing to do with threat assessment. Wren's pulse climbed. Somewhere behind her ribs, a warning she'd trained herself to trust, the same one that had flagged a man's hand angle through a diner window, went suddenly, uselessly silent, replaced by something with no tactical value whatsoever. "You're staring," Sabine said quietly. "So are you." Neither of them moved to fix it. It was Priya's voice over the hallway comm, flat and urgent, that finally broke it. "Ma'am, you need to see this. Now." The file Priya pulled up on the Situation Room's central screen made Wren's stomach drop before she'd even finished reading the header. A ballistics report, 3 years old, freshly reflagged. The weapon recovered from yesterday's failed shooter on Ashford Street had been manufactured by the same supplier, sold through the same black market broker as the device used in the Port Meridian bombing. "That's not a coincidence," Priya said. "That's a signature." Sabine's face did not change. That was the thing Wren would remember most about this moment, months later, how still Sabine went, how completely she folded whatever she was feeling into some locked interior room, the way she must have learned to do 3 years ago and never once unlearned. "Pull every internal record from the 4 months before Elena died," she said, her voice level, terrifyingly level. "Every access log, every visitor badge. I want to know who was in this building the week before the bombing, and I want to know today." "Sabine," Priya's voice gentled, just slightly, the tone of someone who'd earned the right to soften around this particular grief. "If this is connected, if someone's finishing something they started 3 years ago, then I want their name," Sabine said, "before they get close enough to finish it." She left the room without another word. Wren found her 20 minutes later on the private terrace 40 floors up, wind pulling at her collar, city lights beginning to bloom gold and white below her, like something spilled and precious. "I told myself it was over," Sabine said without turning around. "I built all of this, a small, bitter gesture at the tower beneath her feet. The glass, the guards, the whole cold fortress of her grief made architecture, so that I would never again have to stand somewhere and not know if the person I loved was safe. And 2 days ago, a woman with a pen told me a stranger was standing behind me, and I realized I had built a fortress with a door I never thought to check." "You didn't know," Wren said. "I should have." Sabine finally turned, up close, in the fading light, Her eyes had a wetness in them that hadn't been there an hour ago, carefully, ferociously unshed. 3 years I've told myself that answer should be enough, that a rival cartel bought a bomb and killed my wife and there was nothing personal in it, nothing I could have stopped by loving her less carefully. If that's a lie, Wren, if someone has been sitting inside my own company for 3 years waiting to finish what they started, then we'll find them, Wren said, and something in her own voice surprised her, steady, certain. The voice she used to have before a review board decided competence in an Omega was a liability instead of an asset. That's what I'm for. Let me be for something again. Sabine looked at her for a long moment, wind moving between them, carrying black cypress and gunmetal into a scent that had gone, for just a moment, unguarded and raw. That answer should not have warmed me the way it did, Sabine said quietly. It did anyway. The second attempt came 4 nights later, and it came for both of them. Wren would replay it forever afterward in exact seconds, the way she'd been trained to, 11:42 p.m. A service elevator that shouldn't have moved without authorization moving anyway, 11:43, Priya's voice cracking urgent over calm, 11:44, the lights in the private residence floor dying all at once, plunging 40 stories of glass into a darkness so total it felt like the building itself had stopped breathing. "Stay behind me," Sabine said, and there was no coldness in it now, only a fast, focused fury that Wren understood instinctively as the sound of someone who had lost one person to darkness like this and would burn the world down before she lost another. No, Wren's voice came out low. Certain, the voice of someone reading a room correctly for the second time in 1 week. 2 exits on this floor. One's covered by whoever cut the power. We take the other, and I lead, because I know how to move in the dark and you don't. Not like this. For half a second, something like surprise crossed Sabine's face, and then, astonishingly, she stepped back and let her. They moved together through a hallway lit only by the pale wash of emergency strips. Wren's hand closed around Sabine's wrist, counting doorways, counting seconds, until a shape peeled off the wall ahead of them, backlit by a single security light, and Wren's whole body went cold with recognition. Not the shooter from Ashford Street. Bigger, trained, waiting. What happened next took 11 seconds. Wren would count them for the rest of her life. She put herself between Sabine and the shape without thinking, the old training surfacing whole and immediate, and took the shoulder check meant for Sabine's ribs and went down hard against the wall and heard Sabine's voice tear out of her in something between a command and a scream. Get away from her, followed by the flat crack of Priya's team finally breaking through the stairwell door, followed by silence, followed by Sabine's hands, shaking now, finally, catching Wren's face between them. "You're bleeding," Sabine said, and her voice had gone somewhere Wren had never heard it go, somewhere with no floor under it at all. "I'm fine. It's my shoulder, not my head." Wren's own hands came up, closing over Sabine's wrists, steadying them both. "You're shaking." "I am allowed to shake," Sabine said, when I almost watched it happen twice. Her thumb moved, unconsciously, along Wren's cheekbone, and the air between them went thick and slow, the emergency lights painting everything a soft red white, both of them still catching their breath, both of them abruptly, achingly aware of how close their faces had come. "Tell me to stop," Sabine whispered, "and I will." "Don't stop," Wren said. The kiss that followed was nothing like the careful, controlled woman Wren had watched give orders in a burning stairwell moments before. It was slow and searching, and it tasted faintly of fear finally being allowed to become something else, and when they broke apart. Both of them breathing unevenly, the lights flickered back on down the hallway, Priya's team restoring power floor by floor, and the world came rushing back in, along with a security radio crackling that the intruder had escaped through the loading dock before anyone could reach him. "He's gone," Priya said grimly, jogging up the hallway, weapon lowered, eyes flicking once, carefully, between the two of them and the space that had, until seconds ago, held no space at all. "Whoever's running this has resources." That was not an amateur. Sabine's jaw set, the mask sliding back into place even as her hand did not let go of Wren's. "Then, we stop treating this like a security problem," she said, "and start treating it like what it is. Someone inside this company wants me dead, and they've been patient enough to wait 3 years to try again." They didn't sleep that night. Not really. Priya's team swept every floor twice, and somewhere near 2 a.m, with the building finally quiet and safe and both of them too wired for rest, Sabine found Wren in the residence kitchen, making tea neither of them wanted, just to have something to do with her hands. "I should tell you about Elena," Sabine said from the doorway, like the words cost her something to spend. "You don't have to. I want to." Sabine came and sat at the small counter, the first time Wren had seen her choose the low, human furniture over anything with a view. She smelled like jasmine and rain. "I know that's not the sort of thing you're supposed to remember about a person 3 years gone, but it's the thing I remember most. She used to tell me I ran this company like I was afraid of it, not like I loved it. She was right. I was afraid of everything by then, losing the business my mother built, losing my name, losing control." Her hands wrapped around the mug, Wren slid toward her, not drinking, just holding the warmth. "My mother taught me that love was a liability, that the moment you let someone matter, you hand them a weapon to use against you." I believed her, right up until Elena, and then I believed it twice as hard after Elena died, because it turned out my mother wasn't wrong. Someone had used love as a weapon. They'd used my love for Elena to know exactly where to plant a bomb. "That's not why she died," Wren said quietly. "That's why you've spent 3 years alone in a fortress you built to punish yourself for surviving her." Sabine's eyes came up, startled, something cracking open behind them. "How do you know that?" "Because I spent 2 years hiding in a diner, punishing myself for a mistake that wasn't mine, telling myself invisible was safer than seen." Wren reached across the counter and covered Sabine's hand with her own warm, where Sabine's had gone cold around the mug. "We're not so different. We just built our fortresses out of different walls." "Tell me about your discharge," Sabine said. The real version, not the file. So Wren did. The compromise detail she'd flagged 3 separate times. The officer who'd overruled her because an Omega's red on a room wasn't worth as much as his gut. The 4 minutes it took a review board to decide she was cheaper to sacrifice than he was. The 18 months of diner shifts that followed, every one of them a small, private penance for a crime she hadn't committed. Sabine listened without interrupting, without offering easy comfort, only her thumb tracing slow circles over Wren's knuckles, and by the time Wren finished, something had shifted in the kitchen's quiet. Something that felt less like 2 wounded strangers comparing scars and more like 2 people deciding, without saying so aloud, to stop carrying them alone. "I want to cook you something," Sabine said abruptly, some hours later, when the sky outside had gone the pale gray of almost morning, not have someone cook it. "I want to make you the eggs my grandmother used to make, badly, probably, because I haven't done it since I was 19, and I want you to eat them and tell me they're terrible." That's a strange thing to want at 4 a.m. "I want an ordinary thing," Sabine said with you. "I have not wanted an ordinary thing with anyone in 3 years. The eggs were, in fact, terrible. Wren ate every bite and told her so, laughing for the first time in days, and Sabine laughed back, a real laugh, rusty and surprised at itself, and for one unguarded hour before the sun came up. Neither the gunman nor the file nor the fortress mattered at all. Then Priya's radio crackled on the counter, and both of them went still, and the hour ended. "We have a name," Priya said, breathless, standing in the doorway with a tablet in her hand and an expression that made Wren's stomach drop before a single word was spoken. The access logs from 3 years ago. One person badged into the Port Meridian security office 6 times in the 2 weeks before the bombing. Same person cleared the loading dock's camera maintenance schedule the night of the intrusion 4 nights ago. She turned the tablet around. Celia Marsh's employee photo stared back at them, copper hair, blade-thin smile, utterly unbothered. "She's been inside this building the entire time," Sabine said, very quietly. "She's been inside every room I've ever grieved in." Celia Marsh's smile did not so much as flicker when Priya's team escorted her into the Situation Room 3 hours later, flanked, unable to leave, the building's exits already sealed on Priya's order. If anything, she looked amused, the particular calm of someone who had planned for this exact conversation for a very long time. "You've had a rough week, Sabine," she said, settling into a chair uninvited, crossing her legs. "First a shooter at some diner, then an intruder in your own home. And now this, accusing the woman who's run your operations division for 9 years, of what? Exactly? Attempted murder? Twice?" "I'm not accusing," Sabine said. "I'm informing you that I know." "Do you?" Celia's eyes flicked, deliberately, to Wren, standing near the wall with her arms crossed, cataloging every micro-expression the way she'd been trained to. "And here's your little stray again. Tell me, Sabine, does it not strike you as convenient? A woman with a classified military background appears out of nowhere, inserts herself into your life within a week of a security breach, and now she's standing in your Situation Room while you interrogate the person who's actually built this company alongside you for a decade?" Her voice sharpened, sweet and venomous at once. "Has it occurred to you that the timing works both ways?" Something cold moved through Wren's chest, not fear of the accusation, but fear of the flicker, however brief, that crossed Sabine's face at the suggestion. There, gone almost before it arrived. "But there. That's not true," Wren said evenly, refusing to let her voice shake. "And you know it isn't. You're the one whose badge cleared the loading dock cameras. Anyone could access my credentials," Celia said, unbothered. "That's the trouble with a company this size, Sabine. Loyalty gets thin at the edges." Her gaze didn't leave Wren's face. "I loved you first, you know. Before Elena. Before this one. I sat across from your mother at a dozen dinners while she groomed you to run this company and told me, more than once, that I understood you better than anyone she'd ever met. And then Elena arrived, all warmth and no spine, and you chose her, and 3 years later she was gone. And here you are again, choosing someone soft over someone who's actually earned a place at your side." Her voice cracked, just slightly, the first true thing she'd said in the whole exchange. "I have spent my entire career proving my worth to you, and you have never once looked at me the way you looked at that woman across a diner bill." The room went very still. "You just confessed," Priya said quietly. Celia's composure snapped back into place a half-second too late. "I confessed nothing." "You said you sat across from Sabine's mother while she groomed her," Wren said, keeping her voice level, methodical, the voice of someone laying out evidence one careful piece at a time. "You said you understood her better than Elena did, and 4 nights ago, someone with detailed knowledge of this building's residential floor cut the power at exactly the moment Sabine and I were both on it. That's not a jealous ex-girlfriend's coincidence, Miss Marsh. That's premeditation with a paper trail." Get her out of my building, Sabine said, and her voice had gone somewhere colder than Wren had ever heard it, colder than the night on the terrace, colder than grief, legal and the board, in 1 hour. Bring everything. Celia stood, unhurried, smoothing her jacket, and for one final moment the mask cracked all the way open, ugly and raw. You'll regret protecting her over me, she said. I built half of what you're standing on. You built a bomb, Sabine said. That's what you built. Wren's warning came 4 minutes too late. She caught it in the security feed while Priya escorted Celia toward legal, a second badge swipe, 30 seconds after Celia's own, from a service entrance no one on the current roster should have had clearance to. Priya, she said, already moving, already reading the room the way her whole body had been built to read rooms. She's not alone. Someone else just. The lights went out floor by floor, systematically this time. Not the fumbling cut of a rattled intruder, but the precise work of someone who'd studied the building's grid for exactly this purpose. And by the time backup power kicked in 20 seconds later, Celia Marsh was gone from her escort side. And so, Wren realized, with a cold plunge of her stomach, was the tablet holding every scrap of evidence they'd just gathered against her. She had a second person inside all along, Priya said, sprinting the length of the corridor, radio already barking orders. A cleanup team. She's not running. She's finishing it. Wren's phone buzzed in her pocket, a number she didn't recognize. A text with no words at all. Only a photograph. Her sister Josie, sitting in what looked like the back of a moving van, a strip of tape across her mouth, her eyes wide and terrified above it. 6 hours, the next message read. Bring the drive Marsh gave you. Come alone. Tell no one, or the board vote at 9 tomorrow proceeds with one less family member to celebrate it. Wren's hands went perfectly, professionally still, the old training closing over the panic like a lid over boiling water, even as everything underneath it screamed. They have Josie, she said, and her voice, to her own surprise, did not break. 6 hours. They want a drive I don't have, and they want me alone. Sabine crossed the room in 3 strides and took Wren's face in both hands, the way she had in the stairwell, except now there was no red emergency light to soften it, only the cold gray dawn coming up outside the windows. You are not going alone, she said. I have already lost one person to this woman's patience. I will burn this entire company to the ground before I lose another. If we don't go alone, they'll kill her the second they see backup. Then we go together, Sabine said, and we make sure they never see us coming. Her thumb brushed once, fiercely gentle, along Wren's jaw. You saw the exit before you saw me, that first day. You've been finding the way out of every room since. Let me find yours, this time. Just this once. Let me be the one who sees the danger first. Wren's throat closed around something that wasn't fear at all. Okay, she whispered. Okay, find it. The address in the second text led to an abandoned freight depot on the edge of Port Meridian itself. The same terminal, Priya confirmed grimly, where Elena Voss had died 3 years ago. Celia's cruelty precise enough to choose the exact ground of her first crime to finish her second. Wren walked in alone, as instructed, an empty drive case in her hand and a tracker sewn into the lining of her jacket that Priya's team had fitted in 11 frantic minutes, while Sabine and 6 of Priya's best moved into position around a perimeter that had once been a crime scene and was about to become one again. Josie was tied to a support beam in the depot's center, tape gone from her mouth now, tears streaking silent down her face, and Celia stood beside her with a calm, satisfied smile that made Wren's blood run to ice. You came alone, Celia observed. Good girl. The drive's empty, Wren said, sliding the case across the concrete floor toward her. I don't have what you want. You destroyed it in the blackout, remember? So let's talk about what you actually want, which isn't a drive at all. Something flickered in Celia's eyes, the first crack of doubt. You're bluffing. I'm reading a room, Wren said. It's the thing I'm good at, and this room tells me you don't actually want to hurt a nursing student who's never met you. You want Sabine to watch you take something else from her, the way she watched you take Elena. That's not strategy. That's grief wearing a knife. Don't. Celia's composure fractured further, her hand drifting toward the gun at her hip. Don't you dare stand there and diagnose me. She loved Elena, Wren said quietly, steadily, buying every second she could while, somewhere in the dark rafters above them, she caught the faintest whisper of black cypress and gunmetal drawing closer. And when Elena died, she built a fortress instead of grieving. Because grieving felt like losing twice. You've spent 3 years telling yourself that if you just removed enough people, she'd finally see you standing there. She never will. Not because you're not enough, because you built your love out of the same fear that killed the woman you were jealous of, and fear never made anyone worth choosing. Shut up, Celia said, and the gun came up, and everything happened at once. Sabine came out of the dark, not like a weapon, but like a wall, putting her own body between the gun and both women she loved in this world, and the shot that followed took her high in the shoulder instead of finding Wren or Josie, and she went down hard against the concrete, with a sound that tore something loose in Wren's chest that she would feel for the rest of her life. Priya's team closed the perimeter in the same breath, weapons up, shouting, and Celia's second shot never came. Because Wren was already moving, already on her knees in front of Celia, with a speed that had nothing left to do with strategy and everything to do with rage, wrenching the gun sideways and down before it could fire again. She had Celia pinned, disarmed, one knee against her spine, and every violent instinct in her screaming to finish it, and it was Sabine's voice, thin and pained but utterly clear from the floor behind her. That stopped her hand. Don't, Sabine said. Don't become what she is. Not for me. Wren's whole body was shaking. She looked down at Celia Marsh, sobbing now, broken open, all her venom finally spent, and she thought of everyone in 3 years who had needed exactly this moment of restraint, and never gotten it, and she let go. Cuff her, she said to Priya, her voice raw. And get Sabine to a hospital. Now, Josie's arms came around her a second later, shaking, alive, whole, and somewhere behind them, Sabine Voss lay bleeding on the floor of the terminal where her wife had died, watching Wren Calloway choose mercy over vengeance, and thought, with the last clear thought before the pain took over, that she had never in her life loved anyone the way she loved this. The board convened in an emergency session 6 days later, and this time, when Wren Calloway walked into a room full of Voss Dynamics executives, she did not wear a waitress uniform or a name tag that said Wren in cheerful looping script. She wore a tailored charcoal suit that Sabine had chosen herself, and she carried a tablet of evidence that laid out, in cold, methodical, unimpeachable detail, 3 years of Celia Marsh's crimes, the falsified maintenance logs, the shell accounts, the recorded confession Priya's team had captured on a hidden feed the night of the depot standoff, Celia's own voice admitting to the bombing that had killed Elena Voss and 5 other people. The room that had once looked at Wren with Celia's exact sneer. A stray. A convenient coincidence. A woman who didn't belong at this table sat in absolute silence as she finished speaking, and it was an elderly board member, a man who had sat on Voss Dynamics' founding committee under Sabine's mother, who finally broke it. In 40 years, he said quietly, I have never seen this company protected by anyone the way you have just protected it. I withdraw every objection I raised about your appointment, Miss Calloway, and I apologize for raising them at all." Sabine, her arm still in a sling, sat at the head of the table and said nothing because she didn't need to. She only watched Wren Calloway be seen, fully, publicly, completely, by a room that had spent a week deciding whether she deserved to be. And something in her chest that had been clenched shut for 3 years finally, quietly, let go. The press conference that afternoon was Sabine's alone to give, and she gave it standing, her sling visible, her voice steady in front of 40 cameras. 3 years ago, my company suffered a tragedy that I was told was random, senseless, unconnected to anything I could have prevented. That was a lie, constructed by someone inside my own walls. I will not stand here and pretend that grief has an easy ending. But I will tell you this, it was not luck, or security systems, or wealth that stopped a second tragedy from happening this week. It was one woman's refusal to look away from a threat everyone else in the room missed. Wren Calloway saved my life at a diner table with a pen that was nearly out of ink, and she has been saving it, in one way or another, every day since. That evening, in the quiet of the residence floor, with Josie safely asleep down the hall and Priya finally, blessedly, off duty, Sabine knelt in front of Wren with her good arm and produced, from her jacket pocket, a small velvet box that had clearly cost her more courage than the press conference had. "I know it's fast," she said, and for the first time since Wren had met her, Sabine Voss's voice shook. "I know grief taught me to be careful, and careful people don't kneel 6 weeks after a diner shooting. But you taught me something careful never did, which is that some people are worth the risk of loving out loud. Wren Calloway, will you let me claim you, properly, with your whole consent, in every sense of that word, as my omega, my equal, my home?" "Ask me with your words," Wren whispered, laughing and crying at once, echoing the very first rule they'd built between them. "I'm asking," Sabine said, "with every word I have." "Then yes," Wren said, "yes, 1,000 times." The bond mark came 3 weeks later, on a night neither of them would ever fully describe to anyone else, preceded by a question asked and answered the way every touch between them had been from the very beginning. "Tell me to stop, and I will. Don't stop." And sealed, at last, with a bite offered and accepted in full, conscious, joyful choice. The bond snapping into place between them like something that had been waiting 3 years and 2 years and one diner bill to finally exist. 6 months later, the wedding was small, held on the private terrace 40 floors above a city that had once tried twice to end this story before it began. Priya stood as Sabine's witness and cried, unashamedly, through the entire ceremony, muttering to anyone near her that in 15 years she had never once seen Sabine Voss wait for anyone, not until a woman with a coffee pot had made her. Dara stood as Wren's, wearing a dress 2 sizes too fancy for a diner waitress's best friend, and grinning through the whole thing like she'd known it would end here all along. Josie read a poem she'd written herself and cried harder than everyone else combined. Celia Marsh's trial concluded that same month with a conviction on every charge, the maximum sentence the law allowed. Her name struck from every record at Voss Dynamics, her face never to darken that lobby again. Gus, the diner manager who'd once docked Wren's pay for being 40 seconds late, sent a wedding card with an apology inside it so awkward it made both women laugh until they cried. A year on, the framed diner bill hangs in the entryway of the home Sabine and Wren built together, a small house outside the city with marigolds crowding every windowsill and a kitchen where Sabine still makes terrible eggs every Sunday morning. The pen that wrote the warning, dead now, its ink long spent, rests beside the frame on a small brass hook, a monument to 4 circled words that changed everything. Some mornings, in the pale gold light before the rest of the world wakes up, Wren stands in front of that frame with a real cup of coffee, properly made, and thinks about the version of herself who once believed invisible was the safest thing a person could be. She was wrong. Being seen, fully, fiercely, on purpose, by exactly the right person was always going to be the safest place in the world. It simply took the right eyes finding her first. The end. If this story found something in you, that ache of being overlooked and the quiet miracle of finally being seen for exactly what you're worth, you're not alone in that. And I'd love to have you back here for the next one. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss it. And before you go, I'm curious, what would you have written on that bill if you were the one who spotted the danger first? Tell me in the comments. I read every one. Thank you for spending these hours with Wren and Sabine. Rest well tonight, and I'll see you in the next story, where someone else is about to be seen for the very first time.